Angus, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, John. How are you doing?
Very good. Now, if you've got a question, by the way, for Angus, something you'd like me to ask him, then it's 086 60 25,000, or you can give us a call on 074 91 25,000. Let's talk, first of all, about a tree that is in flower at the moment, because the leaves are out, and it's because it's a late, it's sort of a late bloomer, if you like. I'm chatting about the ash.
The ash, yeah, the common ash tree is one of our big trees, one of our kind of grand trees, and it's the last tree pretty much to come out in springtime. The aspen would probably kind of rival it, but they don't really start coming out until May. They're very cautious trees, the ash tree. Its leaves are quite delicate, and they're affected by frost. And in fact, some of the ash trees that came out around me, you might remember earlier on in May, or about the middle of May, a couple of weeks ago, there was a couple of very cold nights, and the temperature dipped. There was actually some frost, and that killed off their leaves. Their leaves are very vulnerable, so that's the reason that they come out so late.
Now, they're hardy enough to survive just about anywhere.
They are. They're pretty tough. They're pretty tough. They won't grow terribly high up in the hills, and they like reasonably fertile soil. But they are tough. They're all over the place. They're very common for us in Donegal. They're the most common of the larger trees in our hedgerows, for instance, right. and we've hedgerows all over Donegal. So they're definitely the most common of them.
There's a saying. How does it go about? You can plant spuds up until you can't see through the tree. Is that or something like that?
Yeah, because the ash tree is unusual. Its leaves, well, it has a very big leaf, but that big leaf then has lots of leaflets coming off it, if that makes sense. So lots of little kind of spiky shaped leaflets. Now they're soft, but they look kind of they're long and pointy, and they allow a lot of light go through. And by the time the canopy fully forms, that's really into late May or even into June. So you'd want to have your spuds in by then, I suppose. Right. But one of the things with that is that they still allow, even in the summertime, they still allow a certain amount of light through, more so than, say, an oak. Oaks are incredibly efficient at catching the light, and their leaves slightly overlap, and they stop so much of the light coming down into the forest floor, along with so many other trees do the same kind of thing, whereas ash still allows a lot of light to get through, which means lots of other plants can grow. You can have a big diversity of understory plants, as they call them, which holds shelter and food for a whole myriad of species, insects, and the kind of characters that are hunting them.
And the timber from the common ash, of course, are widely used, and famously for hurleys and hockey sticks and walking sticks and the like. Yeah,
it's very good timber. It's got all sorts of uses. It's used in furniture. It's used. It burns very well, but also it absorbs shock. It's shock absorbent. So brilliant if you're using it for the handle of a hammer or a handle of a pickaxe or something like that, because it doesn't allow that shock. So if you think of a metal bar, if you bang a metal bar, you can feel that shock coming right up, whereas if you've got a big piece of ash and you bang it off something, it really soaks up that shock. So perfect for the likes of the hurley sticks, because they're big, they're strong enough to be able to withstand that kind of length and absorb that shock. And in fact, the hurley sticks, the spoon piece of the hurley stick comes from underneath the ground, actually. When they pull up those ash trees, that kind of bowl, that big knotty piece at the bottom, is where they get that lovely big wide piece and can make it just out of one piece of wood.
Oh, you're nothing if not a wealth of information, Angus.
Well, the ash tree is a wonderful tree, and I like to see it. For me, they kind of signify a bit of a change from spring into summer, because so many other trees are busy and doing their thing. They start off in March and April, but by the time the ash tree is out, you truly are in summertime.
Now, from the common ash to what's known as the mountain ash or Rowan tree. Mountain ash or Rowan, and the Rowan really, I suppose, would be the more typical name in Ireland, but mountain ash is often called as well, because the leaves are similar. In other words, they have one big leaf, but on it are lots of leaflets, lots of kind of narrow, pointy little leaflets. The difference is, well, first of all, they're not as big, and second, they're slightly serrated. So if you held up the two side by side, the size would be the first thing, but the serration on the edge of the leaflets of the Rowan tree, that is, the one they call mountain ash, it makes them a little bit different. But that's where the similarities end. After that, the Rowan tree is a tougher thing again, actually.
their name, the mountain ash, gives it away. They will live at a higher altitude, or they can survive at a higher altitude pretty much than any other tree in Ireland, along with the Scots pines and the downy birch, the really tough trees. So you'll find them high up in the mountains. Sometimes, in fact, if you like going walking in the hills and mountains around, and you find a mountain ash, a small little kind of nearly like a bonsai mountain ash, it could be 100 years old, even though it's tiny, because there's not much nutrition up there, and the growing season is so short when it's cold.
And it should be in flower at the moment, is that right?
It is in flower at the moment, yeah. It comes out a little bit after the hawthorn, really. Same-ish kind of time, or a little bit after. Has similar kind of creamy flowers, but they're in a wider cluster of them. And they're wonderful for our pollinators. They're wonderful for so many different insects. And, of course, those flowers in turn then will all turn into big, heavy berries, which feed the blackbird and the thrushes and the robins and sustain those guys in the autumn time.
The seed of the rowan is spread by birds, and even though the rowan tree is native, it's not, I suppose, not as common as we might think.
It's not. It likes particular kind of little habitats, and it likes to have good light and good opportunity to be able to get growing. So other trees would dominate it. Now you'll sometimes see onto the likes of the common ash, actually, in common ash plantations, you'll sometimes see little baby rowans coming up, because the birds, once they've ate those berries, and they get the nutrition out of the berries, the little seeds, they'll either spit them out, or for the bigger birds, they'll pass right through their system. And those birds, when they're roosting at night, perhaps in the common ash tree, will drop down that little seed. It's amazing, really, when you think of it. That direct relationship. The reason the rowan tree has those lovely red berries isn't because it's kind and nice and thoughtful for our blackbirds, the way we might kind of think. It's using those birds as a vector to spread its seeds around. And those birds, then, when they're roosting in the bigger trees above, they will drop down that little berry, and the rowan tree will be able to grow onto the ash because of the light availability, and it needs that bit of light.
And those berries are edible. They're very bitter, mind you, but they are edible.
They are edible, yeah. Apparently, when they're frostbitten, there was one fella, a guy called Dr. John Rutty. He said that the berries became sweet acid and not an ungrateful taste. Now, not an ungrateful taste makes you think. That's all relative, I think. In our modern world of being able to get foods from all over the globe, we mightn't like them so much. But back in the day, they were certainly used. They would have been used for jams and preserves and that kind of thing. But also, they would have been there was a drink made out of them by fermenting them. But also, then after they were frostbitten, they were probably being used as a valuable little source of vitamin C and that kind of thing.
You mentioned there the hawthorn in bloom at the moment, and I have a letter here, a letter and some photos, lovely photos actually, of the hawthorn. And the letter says, to enjoy the beauty of the hawthorn bush in full bloom is a joy to behold, and I'd just like to thank the farmers who, instead of cutting them back with hedge cutters, let them grow to their natural height. They are surely rewarded in the autumn when the low sun lights up the berries of the same little bush. It should be cherished as a little gem, one of the countryside's most beautiful sights, plus good for the birds and bees.
That's just gorgeous, and you couldn't say it better. They're right, and it's the farmers that look after and manage our land, and it's the farmers that allow these things to stay there, that allow these nature corridors of hedgerows. And the hedgerows, of course, are dominated quite often by the hawthorn tree. And by allowing them to grow and by managing them, as many farmers do in the correct way, by allowing them within their fields to grow for 2 or 3 years before trimming them back, and maybe trimming one side every alternative year, if that makes sense. You're giving a constant food source, you're giving shelter. Now, right now, our gardens are full of baby robins and blue tits and all the other little chaffinches and all these characters, and they're relying on those hedgerows, and they will rely on those hedgerows over the next couple of months. So that's a lovely piece that's there, but it's an essential part, as well as giving us pleasure. It's an essential part of our nature. Plus, of course, they help with drainage, and they provide shelter for animals, for stock, that kind of thing as well. So they're very useful.
And speaking of farmers and nature, farmers are being rewarded for a very successful bird breeding program.
They are. There is an amazing bird of prey called the Hen Harrier. And the Hen Harrier is something that people mightn't have heard of as much because there's so few of them left, unfortunately. We have them in Donegal. They've been
in small numbers.
Very small numbers, yeah. You'll occasionally come across them in Glen Veigh, in Inch Wildfowl Reserve, places like that up in Inishowen. But down in South Donegal, in the mountains, you'll find them as well. If you think, do you remember back in the day there was the Harrier jet? That crazy jet engine that used to be able to turn its engines, and it could go up directly.
Yes.
And kind of hover in a weird way for an aeroplane. Well, of course, the designers, that got their inspiration from Harriers. Now, there's a few different types of Harriers, but Harriers have an amazing flying ability. So they fly over open lands. They like the uplands, they like moorland, bogland, and they're looking predominantly for birds like pipits. And the most common bird is the bog, the one that the cuckoo lays its eggs in, and skylarks, and maybe things like starlings as well. And sometimes some of the smaller rodents, they'll go for mice and shrews and even a small rabbit. But what makes them so stunning, I think, is the fact that they have an ability to be able to virtually stop in midair. It's like they're on invisible strings, and they can seem to stall and they can seem to pivot when they're hunting without falling out of the ground. They seem to defy the very laws of physics.
Now, the reason the farmers are being rewarded is because of their help with a programme. It's a 5-year programme, the largest species-specific project of its kind in the whole of Europe. But this has been paid out to farmers in designated areas.
Yeah, so there's been a few designated areas that are protected already under European and under Irish law for nature for various reasons. But as well as being an amazing bird, they're also one of those indicator species. And we've mentioned indicator species before. And what that means is if there's a hen harrier successfully living in your area, that means your nature around the balance is right. And for a very, very long time, farmers in those kind of upland areas and those kind of what we call semi-improved grasslands, so they're not the big shiny green fields where you'll have your Frisian cows. The kind of farms that they call high nature value. So there's been a few areas like this that have been picked. And farmers have been encouraged or rewarded if they do the right things for biodiversity. So a little bit like the Bride project that we've mentioned a couple of times before, it's not just a direct payment, it's a reward scheme, which I think is a great way of going about it, and people can opt into this. An ecologist comes out and helps them to manage their land and improve their land, if needs be, for the nature around and for the right kind of habitat that will support the hen harrier. And remember, if the habitat is supporting the hen harrier, if it's lightly grazed in the spring and the summertime by suckler cows and that kind of thing, it will have a big diversity of flowers, it'll have a big diversity of grasses, and that in turn will do a few things. Those lands, they tend to be very good at flood control. They tend to be very good for carbon sequestering, which is something we're talking about more and more now. So for pulling carbon dioxide out of the sky and storing the carbon. Very good for supporting the range of insects and other animals that are associated with that, and then ultimately the hen harrier itself. And in 2019, there was great success. This program's been going on for a couple of years, but 2019, I think it was 81 chicks were reared on the I think it's 6 different sites that are on this scheme. So slowly but surely they're hopefully making a little comeback, because there's only really a couple of hundred of these birds in the country. They're terribly scarce.
Well, speaking of scarce birds, someone says, why do we only protect corncrakes while they're on the ground and not their habitats all year round? It doesn't make sense, and it's a waste of money if we're not going to take their protection seriously.
Well, they're a migratory bird, so there's very little we can do when they fly out of here. But it is a very interesting point, because it is something that has been talked about quite often. A lot of these birds, or a lot that might get protection, they might fly to a country that doesn't have the resources that we have, or isn't able to tap into EU funding like we can. And it's something that people do discuss, and they say, should we be looking at having more protection for when they're far away as well? And how can we help those populations, those communities of people, to protect those birds that will come back and breed here? But the corncrake, a little bit like the hen harrier program, once you protect a bird like that in its breeding grounds, and that's such an essential thing, because then the next generation can keep going and so on, but once you're protecting that, you're protecting a whole load of other life along with it, and you're putting in place a suitable habitat for an awful lot of other creatures that should naturally be there if we don't intensify it too much or drain the land too much, or whatever it is.
And staying with birds, you have been busy filming some birds out near your home, because you've set up a camera in a swallow's nest.
Yeah, I have a swallow's nest in the barn. I always leave the shed. I like to leave the shed open just a crack, leaving them access to come in April time or so. Now, they do make a little bit of a mess, but they're just such stunning visitors. They're such amazing flyers. In fact, my daughter said only yesterday evening, as they were watching them scooting around, they're saying, "Daddy, they fly so close to the ground." They really do. They're incredible acrobats, the swallows. And they have built a little nest out of 3,000 little balls of mud and lined with some of their own feathers and other feathers and little bits of grass and things. And they laid 3 eggs. And last Wednesday, so 7 days ago, those 3 eggs hatched all at the same time. And Mum and Dad have been in and out and in and out. And even though the weather is a bit colder, they've been in and out feeding these little birds. And actually, as I speak, the mum is sitting on the nest with her wings kind of half spread, because the birds grow at an incredible rate. So when you think the swallow's egg is about maybe twice the size of a Malteser, not even, 1.5 times the size of a Malteser. So the bird comes out of that tiny, and already that bird is now maybe 3 times that size or so, and is starting to develop feathers. And soon Mum won't be sitting on them anymore. There just won't be room. And Mum and Dad are back and forth every single day.
Why is Mum spreading her wings? Is to make sure they don't fall out?
Well, to try and keep them warm. So Mum has been sitting on them for the last week when she's not feeding. So she goes off, gets some feed, as does Dad, but Mum also then keeps them warm. And the weather has been quite cool. But now that they're growing bigger and bigger and bigger, she's having to spread out her wings, which doesn't look very comfortable, really, to cover the whole nest, because these are only 3 of them, but these 3 chicks are already pretty much filling the nest. And their little heads, you can see them sticking up the whole time. And their demand for food is something else. Especially in the morning and the evening time, the Mum and Dad are coming back and forth every few minutes.
And we can see the action on your website.
Yeah, well, where I have it actually is up on Facebook. I've posted these, so I take short little videos of that screen. I don't have it live, and I post them up on Facebook or on Twitter every day. And it's fun to watch, and you can just see the progression day to day from these little videos, the size of these things. There's something in those bugs that they're eating that must be very good for you if you're a swallow.
So it's Nature Northwest on Facebook?
Nature Northwest, all one word, on Facebook, or on Twitter.
All right, until next week, Angus. Thanks a million.
That's great. Thanks, John.